Members, good afternoon. This is the appointed time and we have a quorum for today's meeting. This is the panel on constitutional affairs. First item, information papers issued since the last meeting. The members, please note that Mr. Yim Kong issued a letter dated the 9th of March this year. You will find details of this letter in the agenda. Mr. Yim Kong proposed a discussion on enhancing the functions of the Constitution and Basic Law Promotion Steering Committee on the Promotion of National Security. We agreed to put this on the list of outstanding items for discussion, and we have referred this letter to the administration for consideration. Second item, items for discussion at the next meeting. Members, please note that the next regular meeting is scheduled for the 25th of April this year, 4:30 p.m. The administration has proposed to discuss two items. The first item relates to the submission of the fourth report by the Hong Kong SAR on CEDAW. As for the next item, the administration would like to have more time to draw a proposal. We will be informed in due course, and I will let member know. Let's see if any members would like to speak. Dr. Teck Chi-yun. Right, I have been asking about the progress for the next DC general election. According to the administration, the review is still in progress. The next meeting is scheduled for the 25th of April. Assuming that the next DC general election will be held by the end of this year, then if we are not able to discuss that proposal as soon as possible, then it will be too tight a time frame for us. So, Chair, is it possible to discuss this item at the next meeting, because this is an issue close to the heart of members as well as the general public? Right, Dr. Teck, I understand you raised the same issue at the last meeting as well. Would the administration please note his comment? In relation to reform of district administration or review of district council elections, if I hear anything from the administration on the progress, I will let member know as quickly as possible. Preferably, if we could hold this meeting at next time to discuss the item, it would be ideal. But I also note your suggestion that a special meeting may have to be held, in particular in relation to this item. I agree that there may be need to call for a special meeting. In fact, you raised a similar point before. So, members, if there is no further comment, we move on to the third item, that is briefing by the chairman of the Equal Opportunities Commission. I see that the chair of the EOC is here. I will invite the chair, Mr. Ricky Zhu, to brief us on the work of the EOC, and then I'll throw open the floor for members. Thank you, Chair. In 2022-23, the EOC made progress in the first 12 months. As for the works for 2023-24, you will find details in paper number CB-2205/2023-02. Now, perhaps I should spend a few minutes in going through the work of the EOC. On law enforcement, in the past 10 months, the EOC handled 7,411 inquiries and 1,052 complaints. Over half of the complaints related to the DDO, Disability Discrimination Ordinance. 70% of complaints related to employment. One common scenario is that an employer fired an employee on the basis of his illness or refused to provide accommodation measures for the sick employee. There are also examples relating to prospective employees infected with COVID, being fired by the employer, or not being employed. When we receive these complaints, we start with conciliation. In the first 10 months of 2023, we had a success rate of 86% in reaching a settlement through conciliation. And we managed to secure over $6.41 million of monetary payment for complainants through conciliation. Our target is to be able to complete 75 of the complaints within 6 months. And in the past 10 months, we managed to complete 85% of all the complaints. As for cases in which conciliation is not successful, the complainant can seek legal assistance from the EOC. In the past 10 months, we handled and received 10 applications for legal assistance, and 6 applications were granted legal assistance. Apart from that, our legal service division also undertakes review of the existing anti-discrimination legislation to draw up recommendations for the government. In mid-2020, we submitted the findings of 2 legal review exercises. First, in relation to protection for persons arriving from the mainland from discrimination and expanding the scope of another piece of anti-discrimination legislation. We have been in close liaison with the relevant bureau in order to exchange views, and the government is at the moment considering these recommendations. On legal studies, the EOC also consider conducting another study to explore the possible options of legislating against discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, as well as age discrimination, which is an issue close to the heart of the public. A preliminary study will be conducted to see if we can make reference to other legal frameworks. On prevention of discrimination through policy, research, advocacy, and training, the EOC has been advocating the adoption of anti-discrimination measures by different sectors of the community. We published the results of 11 surveys on various topics: sexual harassment, discrimination faced by those with mental illness, and EM students in challenges in receiving education, carers, as well as SEN students. That is the challenges facing them in the learning environment. On anti-sexual harassment, we set up a dedicated unit called the Anti-Sexual Harassment Unit in 2020. In the first 10 months of 2022-23, the unit received 341 inquiries about sexual harassment. These are inquiries raised by those suspected to have been sexually harassed. We also received over a quarter of the cases or inquiries made by human resources personnel in companies. They wanted to have advice on establishing an anti-sexual harassment mechanism and measures. The anti-sexual harassment units also, on appropriate occasions, offer different services such as counseling and shelter services. And in May last year, we had a roundtable session with tertiary institutions to exchange views on preventing anti-sexual harassment. And we also prepared an online training kit or module on the prevention of sexual harassment on campus. On advocating equal opportunities for ethnic minorities, we are strengthening support for those with special educational needs. We also have video clips to help people understand better the responsibilities at the workplace in preventing discrimination. We also provide information in supporting those with disabilities. For example, last year, we rolled out a set of guidelines for judges and judicial staff to ensure equality for the disabled. This is a set of practical guidelines. We hope that this will help judges and judicial staff help those with hearing impairment to seek justice. On EMs, our dedicated unit has been mounting extensive publicity to the general public and to the education sector. In fact, in MTR stations and the bodies of buses, you will see slogans advocating inclusiveness for people with different ethnic minorities. And we also rolled out an employer charter in 2018. And 4 years down the road, 300 organizations have signed this charter covering about 250,000 employees. Basically, these organizations agreed that an inclusive and discrimination-sensitive environment should be provided to cultivate diversified talents. We understand that our young people is also key to ensuring equal opportunities. In October last year, we rolled out the first Equal Opportunities Youth Ambassador Program targeting tertiary education students so as to enhance the understanding of equal opportunities. So far, we have enlisted 30 or over 30 tertiary students from different backgrounds and ethnicities to our program. And we've organized different activities. For example, we have athletes leading various physical activities we also visited different places where EMs are hired so as to enhance the awareness of racial equality, so as to cultivate positive values in them, for them to make contribution to Hong Kong and our country in the future. Looking ahead in 2023-24, as Hong Kong resumes normalcy and the epidemic subsides, the focus is how we integrate into the country's overall development plan. Meanwhile, the disadvantaged group, including the EMs and those with disabilities, are still facing a lot of challenges day in, day out, especially because of the epidemic. Many people have lost their jobs and have had poorer living standard. In order to allow equal opportunities in 2023-24, the EOC will be taking rigorous enforcement action together with publicity to enhance the protection for the disadvantaged groups and to ensure equal opportunities in terms of access of community services. And we're concerned about employment in particular. 70% of the complaints received happened in the workplace. At the same time, the disadvantaged group faces a lot of challenges in seeking employment. Some employers are still biased against the EMs and the disabled and those with mental illnesses. Some companies do not adopt family-friendly employment practices, posing difficulties for those who are required to take care of their family members. We understand that for women, even for elderly people with disabilities, they can contribute to our workforce and they can replenish the workforce with their talents. And in order to ensure equal opportunities for all in the coming year, the EOC will be further promoting the message of equality and inclusiveness for, say, organizations and corporations to adopt these ideas in their daily practices. We will also be leveraging on the community and the community organizations to expand the talent pool in Hong Kong. The other highlight of the EOC is support for carers. In recent years, a number of tragedies happened relating to carers, sparking social concerns. Many women are forced to leave the workforce temporarily because of lack of support for them to take care of the family members. Comprehensive policies should be set up for different sectors of the community to adopt a family-friendly workplace culture so as to retain talents. In 2023-24, through various platforms such as seminars, talks, and training, the EOC will continue to publicize family-friendly employment practices and also enhance the FSDO. With full resumption of travel arrangements with the mainland, the EOC will also step up liaison with the relevant mainland counterparts and units. For example, recently we have set up a meeting with judicial personnel from the mainland who will be here for the purpose of training, and we will also be exploring opportunities of collaboration with the Equal Opportunities unit in the mainland. And in 2019, in fact, the EOC visited Guangzhou and other places in the mainland. We've accumulated knowledge and experience in this regard, and we hope that we will be able to contribute to integration of Hong Kong into the Greater Bay Area as well as the country's overall development plan. Hong Kong is on a path of normalcy, and myself and my colleagues in the EOC will continue to uphold the mission of eliminating discrimination in society. We'll also provide advice to organizations and companies to ensure equal opportunities. We'll also act as the middleman between the government and the business sector so that we can have collaboration and build an inclusive and caring society together. That concludes my presentation. I welcome questions and comments on the EOC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chi. We will now open the floor for questions. I will now read out the names of members who have indicated that they will ask questions, beginning with Carmen Khan, Dr. Teck Xie Yun, Martin Liao, Dr. Jonas Ho, Tang Fai, Priscilla Leung, and Nissi Lam. We'll begin with Ms. Khan. Thank you. My first question is, well, I think according to paragraph 15, we understand that from 2022, the government has already submitted the findings of the legal study as to how we can, through legislation, address the question of discrimination between Hong Kong people and mainlanders. So this is one of the highlights of your work for 2022-23. Now, for this ongoing study, when you first started the study, has there been any changes since then? So, had there been any changes, since you launched a study? I say this, Chairman, because with the passage of time, I think there has been more exchanges between Hong Kong and the mainland. For example, our CE, our officials, and even our Chief Justice are now going on exchanges in the mainland. And also we are intensifying, cooperation in the Greater Bay Area between Hong Kong and Macau. And also during the COVID, we have seen more exchanges between Hong Kong and the mainland. During the weekend, for example, number of visitors from the mainland, the number has already exceeded 100,000. We can see that according to the latest data and also the development of the economy after the pandemic, all these exchanges are very important. I'd like to bring out one issue, that is respect among people, whether or not we belong to the same race is very important. So other than legislation, what I'd like to ask is, first of all, have there been any latest developments since you first started the study? Has the problem of intra-race discrimination become more serious? I personally believe that legislation should be the last resort. If the problem of racial discrimination is so serious that, intra-race discrimination is so serious that we need to react and resort to legislation, that is a serious problem. So this is really something that we should reflect seriously upon. So there, first of all, a need for legislation. And secondly, through public education, can we send out, disseminate the message of respect. Secondly, the Chairman talked about the family carers. Now, in your study, what is the greatest need of the family carers? Regarding discrimination against mainlanders, I think this panel had already had discussions on this topic before. But with the changes in our society, would the chairman also like to share with us how the commission deal with this issue? Now, first of all, thank you for the question. Regarding discrimination against mainlanders, we have been closely monitoring the situation. For example, through our hotline, we have monitored whether or not there have been an increase in the number of complaints. What is encouraging is that there has not been any significant increase in the number of inquiries and complaints. According to the news that we've heard, there have been individual reports. Some KOLs have reported that they have seen incidents where mainlanders coming to Hong Kong have been discriminated against. But our observation that these are isolated instances. It is not, representative of the attitude overall of the Hong Kong people towards mainlanders. I agree that legislation should be the last resort. Now, the EOC, when we first considered this issue, we found out that based on the reports and inquiries that received, that we found that in the field of employment and in the use of public utilities and facilities, visitors from the mainland sometimes indeed have been subject to an unnecessary insult or hostility. So, to address the question of intra-race discrimination, I think we should come up with rules regarding the rise of, mainlanders. So in this respect, we have worked closely with the CMAB. Should we have any further, proposals, ideas, we will be happy to share our thoughts with members. Regarding family carers, we have been proposing to the government, family-friendly measures at the workplace. In Hong Kong, I think we have, disabled person. The carers are normally elderly or disabled persons. So, other than a lenient employment policy, I think the government should provide more support and have more understanding. There should be more people talking to them so that while they are caring for the family members, they will not feel that they are alone. So I think mental support and psychological support is very important for these carers. I think we need to do more in this area. Next, Dr. Chi Yun, thank you. According to the EOC report, we understand that Chairman Chi and his colleagues have done a lot of work, especially in promotion and publicity, and I think they should be commended for that. I have two questions. First of all, the chairman talked about employment of the disabled people. You told us that in the next year, this will be the focus of your work. I understand that the EOC has done a lot of publicity, but the fact is that employment among disabled persons in this regard, there had not been any progress. Situation has actually has deteriorated. In the past, the government, about 2% of the civil servants are disabled. Now, the number has dropped to 1.5%, and that is not satisfactory. I hope the EOC will closely monitor that. According to our understanding of many public organizations, such as NGOs and schools and hospitals, we don't see too many of the staff who are disabled persons. As the chairman said, the disabled, including women and the elderly, they are precious, human resources. The government is trying to compete for talent. So, Chairman, do you understand that in Hong Kong we need to enact legislation to protect the employment rights of the disabled? Now, you've done a lot of study already. It is the right time now to enact legislation. And secondly, regarding the owners and corporations in housing estates, the power to manage your estate lies in the OC. In the past, there have been complaints that when the NGOs go to an elderly home, the OC refuse to let the coaches to enter the housing estate, and the elderly would need to be pushed on a wheelchair onto those coaches, and it's not very convenient. I understand that the homes concerned have lodged complaints to the EOC and asked for mediation, but there have not been any satisfactory results because the power lies in the owners and corporation, and there are no laws, to regulate them. So I hope the EOC will come up with clear guidelines appealing to the OCs, Owners Incorporated, that for these welfare organizations, they should provide for some, leeway so that we can have a way to ensure that there could be convenience to help these disabled and senior persons. Thank you. First of all, regarding employment of the disabled persons and whether we should have legislation to protect their rights. I think one needs to be careful about this topic. In 2019, when I went to Guangzhou and Dongguan, I had talked to the trade union representatives. I understand that in the mainland, they have administrative rules stipulating that large corporations and companies would need to, employ a significant proportion of disabled persons. If they fail to do that, they would need to, give resources to organizations helping the disabled to promote employment for the disabled. So they're not resorting to legislation. Therefore, there is room in Hong Kong for us to consider using administrative means or encouraging the trade to come up with voluntary accommodation so that, companies or corporations can hire more disabled persons and also, working, women and the family carers. Regarding the Owners Incorporation, I like to thank the members to point out that our guidelines are useful. We have one successful example where the scenario Dr. Chick mentioned happened. While we don't have the power according to the law, but we have actually directly liaised with the Housing Department and the Owners Incorporation, and after that the problem was resolved. So under the present framework, the EOC already can continue to be involved and help. In our guidelines for the Owners Incorporation, we will actively consider that suggestion. Yeah, please, we don't want, elderly people having to be, for example, put into such, uncomfortable situation. Two questions regarding discrimination against the mental patients at the workplace in Hong Kong. There's a lot of people live, according to the EOC's study regarding stigmatization of mental patients. We understand that in Hong Kong, mental patients in general are subject to discrimination. More than 40% of them over the last 5 years have been discriminated against at the workplace. More than 30%, while they apply for jobs, they have been discriminated against. Most employers and managers don't have a good understanding of this issue, and there are no guidelines for them to deal with such complaints. And they don't know what would be the best way to work with the mentally disabled people. My question is how we can enhance corporations and the public's understanding of the disabled, and how we can help corporations, especially SMEs, to provide support for their employees who are mental patients. And secondly, in the strategic plan of the EOC 2020-2022, you had 5 strategic objectives, including the building up of a larger database, anti-discrimination database. What is the progress to date? And regarding the anti-discrimination database, would you open the database so that private organizations can access the information? Thank you, Mr. Liao. 2 questions, Chairman. Thank you. First of all, regarding mental patients being discriminated against at the workplace, we hope that next year we will be able to directly, liaise or contact the SMEs in Hong Kong. In the past, when we talked to them, they told us that because of lack of resources, and if they have employees who are mental patients, it would adversely affect the operations. And that's why during recruitment, they have all kinds of constraints. So in this regard, we would need to help them understand that hiring disabled employees, especially mental patients or recovered mental patients, this may not necessarily cause a lot of adverse impact. So of course we can suggest constructive guidelines and codes of practice to help them improve their workplace. So we need to expand our network or liaison network with them. But at this time, I will not stress too much the point that we need to enact legislation and adopt a punitive approach. Instead, we should actively try to change the mindset. Now, before you ask your second question, I'd like to ask whether these guidelines are already in place.
That means guidelines relating to employees with mental illness at the workplace. The speaker's mic is not on. Well, we have guidelines on the definition of mental illness and accommodation measures for them. And we plan to roll out another set of guidelines. For example, using the guidelines we published for judicial personnel, we devise accommodation measures at the workplace for mentally ill employees, for example, more frequent breaks for them to take medication. Since the EOC deals with anti-discrimination legislation, we do not have the power to proactively require employers to adopt certain measures. We can only provide guidelines. Right, so be it. It's not a mandatory requirement. I understand that. What about the second question? About the database, we receive inquiries and complaints, and then we collect information in the course. We now have dedicated personnel to handle the information collected. Previously, we keep information and data at a higher level. It was related to the legislation itself. We keep the files, otherwise we don't keep them. But in recent years, we found ourselves having the need to refer to these cases frequently. So we're collating the data from these cases. Also, last year, some 400 employers took part in the Equal Employers Commendation Scheme and were able to keep the contact information and particulars of the employers concerned. Again, we collect this information to help us drive the drawing up of accommodation measures for the mentally ill employees, so that we have proper contact points. The database is about collating information in this regard. Are we going to allow public access to the database? The answer is no. We're not going to make it public. But in using this database, we will be liaising with the relevant organizations or individuals, and by then, details will be disclosed to the individuals concerned. We're not going to hold a major exercise. So it's just a database for keeping information, not for evidence, right? About inquiries and complaints, the information collected therefrom will include, for example, evidence and the reference that we can make from when we handle future cases. It's not just about gathering evidence. We also keep records of the organizations and the individuals concerned in these cases. Basically, the database will help EOC in mounting publicity campaigns against discrimination in the future. Is not a case in which we have to make public the information. 7 members are still waiting, so Mr. Zhu, please also note the time limits. Next, Dr. Jun is Ho. Paragraph 51 of the paper relates to expanding the diverse talent pool, and the EOC has all along been advocating diversity and inclusiveness, that is DE&I, employment policies in both the private and public sectors. So, Mr. Zhu, Commissioner, what is your take on this? Diversity and inclusion. After all, these are concepts drawn up in the Western culture. This is quite different from the traditional Chinese culture. We don't encourage discrimination, of course. But what about gender, transgender, transvestites, transgender, same-sex marriage? These are sensitive issues. I understand earlier that you were conducting an internal survey. Since these issues have extensive implications, we need to be careful. Now, when the government is trawling for talent, we need to make our stance clear. We need to stand firm on our grounds. There must be boundaries. This may not be directly related to diversity as such, but rather the core social values. So what is the system practice in Hong Kong? A man and a wife, the matrimony of man and wife, and this is also akin to Article 23 of the Constitution. Well, it's all right if you have homosexual practices in your private life, but if you step out of the line and if you publicize this lifestyle to the extent that it becomes a natural right in the name of not discriminating against the sexual minorities, then we need to be vigilant. We're trying to safeguard traditional family values and core social values, and we may be accused of discriminating against them. So how are we going to make sure that we don't discriminate them whilst we safeguard the core family values? Because this is a reverse discrimination. So my question is on how we strike a balance and reduce social conflict. Safeguarding family values, that's also a very important concept. Now on paragraph 51, DEI, this is about the 4 pieces of legislation covered by the work of the EOC in relation to race, family status, gender, and disability. That's D&I. The honourable member mentioned same-sex marriage, and this is not the work of the EOC in advocating diversity and inclusion in corporations. Now, we work in accordance with the 4 pieces of anti-discrimination legislation. So just to supplement, we are conducting an internal study on sexual orientation, sexual minorities. The focus of the study is to work on the existing legal framework. And how protection can be offered under the existing framework of these particular groups of individuals. I really appreciate what the Commissioner said in terms of the scope of the legislation on discrimination. At the moment, we have only 4 pieces of anti-discrimination legislation. They should not be hijacked and be extended to infinitely. Next, Mr. Tang Fei. Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. One important point in this paper is that a legal study will be conducted on discriminating against the mainlanders. If in the end of the day legislation is enacted to prevent discrimination against the mainlanders, how do we draw up definitions? Say some mainlanders in Hong Kong may be mainland tourists for a short-term stay. Some are mainlanders who have come to Hong Kong for fewer than 7 years. And in fact, some mainlanders have come to Hong Kong for 2 decades, but because of their accent or other features at the workplace and in society in general, they are still discriminated against. So will your anti-discrimination law include these people? They are permanent Hong Kong residents, but because of their accent and other features in their social life and in their work life, they are discriminated against as mainlanders. Second point about paragraph 16 of the paper. Prevention of discrimination policy, research and advocacy. In fact, in November 2022, there was a study on introducing sexual education in secondary schools in the territory. I want to know its relationship with discrimination. And you also made a bold step in the focus group exercise. Some students told us about this issue. On social media, there are the so-called sexual therapists and after all, they are just practicing online dating or compensated dating, and this is a prevalent problem. So I want to know whether this is a discrimination issue. Will the EOC follow up on the issue? Especially recently, we've heard about an outrageous scandal involving a cult in Korea. They practice sexual assaults, and upon investigation, I've noticed that their forces have reached out to school campuses, even secondary schools. So will the EOC consider legislation against these acts? 2 questions. First, on discriminating against mainlanders. The scope of the legislation should cover those who live, study, or carry out activities in Hong Kong from the mainland, regardless of the years of residency. This is exactly where the concept of interracial discrimination stems from. And we are looking into how we define the origin of an individual in drawing up the anti-discrimination law. We are working out the nitty-gritty, and members should know that previously we also got in touch with you to tap your views. Sex education. The EOC has become involved because, according to a survey, in the past year, about 25% of students had the unhappy experience of sexual harassment in the campuses. So we'd like to take this opportunity to provide correct sexual education to our students, and we have been in close liaison with the Education Bureau. In fact, I met with the Secretary for Education to discuss this issue. The Education Bureau will continue to follow up on the matter. Next, Dr. Priscilla Leung. Thank you, Chair. I have questions on paragraphs 8 and 9. Paragraph 8, interracial discrimination. I have been following up on this issue in the LegCo since 2008. In the School of Law in City University, Hong Kong, where I am teaching, the school hired a group of mainland professors with rather strong accents, and a complaint was lodged. The professors in the end won the case. The EOC also issued a letter to help eliminate discrimination. In 2019, when at the peak of this issue, for 普通话 speaking individuals, when they go out, they dare not speak 普通话. They must speak Cantonese in order to protect themselves. Now, my question is this. It is a question for Chairman Zhu. In 2019, we had experienced the worst, and all along, I support the racial discrimination ordinance. At the time when the RDO was passed, we already recommended adding this element of interracial discrimination. This is exactly because the EOC has not been given sufficient powers. They have no jurisdiction over the matter. I want to know whether this is still the case. That is, in terms of RDO, do you have a proper mechanism? Are you privy to this mechanism?
Secondly, since 2021, although I have provided assistance in respect of isolated cases, you have, for example, Cantonese speaking students, pouring water, at Putonghua speaking students, and the cases were reported to the police. So those are isolated cases. My observation is that there's now a change in the public attitude. When you further consulted us about the proposed legislation, I agree that we needed more time. As to how we should enact the legislation, we didn't want to, go to the extreme. So since 2012, is our observation correct that there has been significant improvements, whether in terms of employment, many senior positions have been filled by mainlanders or mainlanders who've been trained overseas? So I'd like Dr. Chu to tell us about, give us your comment on that. And secondly, regarding sex discrimination, I've come across some police officers who have been affected by COVID, and they were actually being discriminated against. If we define it in terms of particular occupation, there have been occupations or professions where the people who work in those professions may be subject to discrimination. So, as a police officer, how do you justify that? Well, thank you for the question. First of all, regarding how we address the question of Putonghua speaking people who have been subject to discrimination in the last few years, can the EOC entertain those complaints? Under the current RDO, there's nothing to stop the EOC to take enforcement action in respect of intra-race discrimination. The ordinance doesn't, stipulate that the person who discriminates and the person who is being discriminated against should belong to, different races. So, if there is an appropriate case which is brought to the EOC, it's possible that we can, attempt to get involved and refer the case to the court. But since 2012, we have not come across any suitable case. In the past, we've come across restaurants which have put up notices to such an effect, but there have been no one taking the complaint to EOC, so we could only, make an appeal. As for the discrimination at the workplace, I think a few years ago we've already said that according to the laws of Hong Kong, we do not have, laws against, occupational discrimination. Sometimes the nature of a particular occupation may change. So should we therefore regulate, based on the occupation? For example, Some people have suggested whether or not insulting a civil servant would be a form of discrimination and an offense. Now, we don't have any fixed position, but discrimination on the basis of occupation, I think it is the nature of that is different from the kind of discrimination, as defined under the LDO. Chairman, I agree. I think we need to think more carefully about occupational discrimination. I think it may not be suitable to deal with the issue from the angle of discrimination. Thank you. Ms. Lam Lam? Thank you. The EOC is responsible for enforcing the anti-discrimination ordinance. One of its terms of reference is to facilitate conciliation among the parties. In paragraph 7, you say that in the 2022-2023, during the first 10 months, you mediated 139 cases, 190 odd cases were successfully conciliated, and the success rate was 86%, which is better than 60 to 70% in the past. So that is quite satisfactory. But with the progress of technology, many people are now relying on technology for help. So is it possible that you can conduct not just physical conciliation, but also conciliation, but mediation, but also online mediation, because that can help cut costs and also make it more convenient for the parties to arrange the time for conciliation. Do you have plans doing that? Thank you. As to whether or not there should be face-to-face mediation or done online, we don't have any particular preference or requirement. Sometimes the cases involve two parties having different positions, and in cases involving employment, documents may be submitted to support the case. The person who is being accused would very much like to have a face-to-face meeting. Because a face-to-face mediation would mean people would think that the parties would be more sincere. But if it is possible to arrange for online mediation, we'll be happy to do that. The important point is that we should consider the choice of the parties concerned and let them to consider which is the best occasion or venue for them to mediate. So is there now an option for the parties to opt for online mediation? Yes. Yes. Many years ago, more than 20 years ago, we've been adopting a very flexible approach. Mediation could be done over the telephone, by mail, or by email, or face-to-face meetings. So long as both parties agree, then we can adopt whatever option. Nowadays, already many of these such mediation are already done online, and our colleagues are happy to consider that, to accept that option. Mr. Yim Kong. Now, I think very often, people have tax allowance for supporting the parents. Right now, for the talents coming from the mainland and domestic helpers in Hong Kong, they also have to pay tax like everybody else. They also need to make contributions to support the parents. But if the parents live in the mainland, they're not entitled to the tax allowance. I understand that you may have a technical issue here. That is, you need to confirm whether or not the parents actually live in the mainland. You may have a technical problem there. But the SAR government now encourages Hong people to, retire in the mainland. So is it the right time now for the EOC to review that policy? Under the one country, two system scenario, now if our parents live in the same in our own country and retire, then I think we should remove the inequality in terms of the tax treatment. Well, thank you for the question. My understanding of the member's question is that you have talents working in Hong Kong. If they need to file for, tax allowance for support of the parents, and they're not able to do that. Now, if there's any connection with the 4 pieces of ordinance that we enforce, it could be the FSDO. But I don't have much understanding of this issue. Perhaps our director can help here. So one case is that if you have a case of discrimination, and because we need to comply with the requirements of other legislation, then the EOC ordinances will not apply. So we have no jurisdiction to handle matters which come under the purview of the other legislation. So if it has to do with the tax revenue, inland revenue ordinances, then we will need to tackle that issue, with reference to the inland revenue ordinance. I think this is an inequality which people in our community has pointed out. You say there is no case law or precedence, but I think you can certainly reflect this issue to the government and have a review together with the IRD. I understand there is a technical problem here, but I don't think the problem is unresolvable. Well, I agree with the member that, well, this is a new issue for me. Now, we certainly go back and take a look at this question and see whether the UC can invoke our legislation here. We are a statutory body, and if it is not within our power to invoke our 4 pieces of legislation to help in this case, then we will not be able to do much. As for our reflecting that issue to the IRD, now if we can certainly forward the concern to the IRD. I'll be happy to take this matter back to our working group and consider it further. So it's actually outside the mandate of the EOC. I think Mr. Yung is looking at the issue, beyond the scope of discrimination. Perhaps we can follow up on this issue after the meeting. Chairman, can you hear me now? I'm sorry. Shall we put back the clock? Okay, I'll give you. Actually, the EOC does a lot of work from someone before he or she is born to the time he passes away. I think EOC's work will cover every stage of his life, whether he's healthy or sick. For all these details on the EOC website, it's not that clear. In Hong Kong, we are competing for, talents. We need to integrate with the GBA. How are you going to do good work in terms of your promotion? Will you leverage on technology or through your platform to do your work effectively so that when people come to Hong Kong, they would know how Hong Kong can offer them equal opportunities so that they will not, fall into traps. Now, I have received some complaints. I don't know whether you are aware of that people have abused the complaint mechanism of the EOC and take complaints to you. For example, if someone wants to, deliberately, ask for holidays without grounds or provoke the employer to dismiss them and so on. So how do you stop such, acts? Well, because such acts has a social cost. If people were to abuse a system like that, would you charge them for the costs incurred on your part?
首先喺
On promotion and publicity of the message of equal opportunities, members may know that we have activities both online and offline. We also publish leaflets. So let me reassure members that this is something we will step up our effort in. And then, as mentioned before, in fact, 2 days later, I will be meeting with a group of judicial officers, senior judges visiting Hong Kong from the mainland. And we have actually set down a date to meet and discuss items relating to discrimination, on abusing our mechanism. Allow me to say the following. In fact, every judicial department around the world faces the same issue of abuse. We have experienced investigation officers who can tell whether this is a complaint worthy of further pursuit or whether this is a case of abuse. And appropriate action can be taken. For example, we can terminate the investigation process where appropriate. Our system ensures fairness on both sides. We will not force any side to back down. Now, on cost control, recovering costs would be quite difficult because you need to first prove improper motive before you take further action against the complainant. However, depending on the circumstances, civil damages can be claimed, but this is, after all, a very rare scenario. I still have time, right, Chairman? On publicity, you can work with the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau and liaise with the relevant chambers of commerce to tell everybody that Hong Kong is a place of equality. On abusing the mechanism, you need to put in a disclaimer or a warning for the complainant that they may face civil claim, because in some instances the complainant may only seek to abuse your mechanism so as to extend their stay in Hong Kong so that the visa remains valid for them to job hop and to look for employment. Right, we'll carefully consider this suggestion. Next, Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I'm very disappointed. The paper is silent on protecting the rights of sexual minorities. I don't think that anyone else's right will be affected if you give the sexual minorities more protection. I don't believe in adverse discrimination. I'm not talking about enacting legislation. Mr. Lai is here. Well, since the R versus W case, or the W versus the Registrar of Marriage case, the government has lost its case according to the Court of Final Appeal, the W case and a number of cases, and also the recent case in which the appellant Q sued the government. The government has lost all these cases all the way through. We have lawyers here. We're all law-abiding. You should not be worried that you will be promoting same-sex marriage, because in Jimmy Shum's case, the court already ruled that this is against the Constitution. So I think it's high time that you wrote another paper and explained the progress to this council. Next, I'm concerned about a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old studying in a girls' school in Happy Valley committing suicide because of their same-sex relationship. There was little media coverage. I understand why, but it's such a tragedy. Now, Commissioner, have you looked into the issue of self-harm among teenagers because of same-sex relationships? Third point. In November this year, gay games will be held in Hong Kong. This is also our effort in demonstrating to the world that Hong Kong is a place of diversity and equality. And I'm very disappointed, Commissioner, because I don't see you're participating in any of the publicity of gay games. Commissioner, first on sexual minorities, we conduct an internal study, and we also consider the judgments handed down by courts in various cases. It seems that we have not voiced our stance. But the point is, we must not depart from the powers given to us under the 4 pieces of anti-discrimination legislation. In fact, according to the guidelines laid down years ago, we do not have powers to exercise jurisdiction outside of the 4 anti-discrimination laws. Gender discrimination ordinance, that's the existing framework we consider. No, I'm not talking about sex discrimination. I'm talking about discriminating against sexual minorities. I'm not asking you to do anything about the existing legislation, but in the past decade, progress has been made in relation to the relevant judgments handed down. You are the official in the highest echelon, apart from the secretary, in charge of discrimination. You should write up another paper. But you get I know how to write this paper, but you get a higher pay. Well, whether the pay is high or not, this is my job. Of course, because you are the official tasked with promoting equal opportunities. I welcome members' comments. I just want to explain that we cannot depart from or do anything that departs from what we're allowed to do in the existing legal framework. All we can do is to find wiggle room in the existing legal framework to move ahead, and this is exactly what we're doing now. The member also mentioned the tragedy that happened in May last year. We talked to the Education Bureau. We'd like to provide students with comprehensive sexual education as well. We want to be the helping force. So it's not the case that we are not sitting. We're sitting on our hands. We're not encouraging same-sex marriage or adverse discrimination. These are not issues we should deal with under the existing legal framework. In terms of day-to-day living, of work, study, commuting, etc., we look after the rights of the disadvantaged groups. So I agree with the honourable member that we will look into areas that we have power over. In fact, what stems from the honourable member's questions is that apart from the mandate you should consider emerging issues such as mainlanders, parents living in the mainland, or sexual minorities and the relevant judgments. You should prepare a report on top of your work in the existing framework. So how about a report on these emerging issues? We act in accordance with the legal framework as it is, but we are not allowed to exercise our power to do anything that we are not permitted out within this legal framework. Any follow-up? This is such a narrow view of the mission of the EOC and the work of the Commissioner. Chair, I really need to take a look at the terms of reference of this EOC and the post of chair of this EOC to see if it's in line with his understanding and legislative intent. Right, do follow up on the issues you find necessary, but let's wrap up the item. We now go to the next one. Item 4, 2023 voter registration campaign. Let's invite the administration to come in. From the administration, we have Mr. Freddie Chick, Principal Assistant Secretary.
好，唔該幾位政府同事。咁我首先呢，就請
Thank you. I will first invite Mr. Freddie Chick to brief members on the paper. And members, if you have questions to ask, please press the button. Thank you, Chair. We're happy to have the opportunity to brief members on the 2023 voter registration campaign. As a standing practice, a number of publicity activities will be carried out as per voter registration. We encourage those eligible to be registered as voters. We encourage the update of address, change of address with the REO. The deadline of both is the 2nd of June 2023. Now, for new registration and change of address, you need to provide address proof. And apart from that, for provisional registers and omission lists, after the announcement on the 1st of August, we will invite registered electors to check the register, and if there is any problem, they should liaise with the REO before the 25th of August. We will also invite new registered electors to confirm the information. They should give us a reply before the 25th of August. I will now invite Mr. Raymond Wong, Chief Electoral Officer of REO, to give you details of this exercise. Good afternoon, Chair, members. This paper briefs members on the overall publicity plan and main features of the 2023 voter registration campaign, or VR campaign. To tie in with the work of the 2023 VR cycle, the REO carries the following objectives. That is to encourage those eligible to be registered as electors, and also if there is any change in the registration particulars, voters are encouraged to submit the application for change of particulars. For new registration and change of particulars, the statutory deadline is the 2nd of June 2023. From now to the 2nd of June, eligible registers can make corresponding applications with the REO. Lest they forget being registered as voters in this cycle. Registered electors are not required to register again. However, if there is any change in their registration particulars, such as their residential addresses, they should submit an application to the REO for change of address before the statutory deadline of 2nd of June. Whether you are a registered or new registered elector to GC, or whether you want to change the COP, change of particulars, you need to provide an address proof for the REO to verify and match the address against that in the voters register. And according to legislation, The 2023 provisional registers and omissions list should be published by the 1st of August for inspection. And during the inspection period, members of the public may lodge claims or objections against the entries of the provisional registers and omission lists, and the revising officer will be determining the objection and claim, and then the rulings will be incorporated. Following that, the REO will publish the final registers on or before the 25th of September 2023. Drawing on previous experience, the 2023 VR publicity plan has been drawn up by the REO. All in all, different channels will be deployed to enhance awareness. The focus of the 2023 VR campaign is as follows. First, to publicize the statutory deadline for COP and NR to encourage registered those eligible to be registered, and to remind members of the public that they are required to provide address proof for change of particulars and new registration, and that through the hotline or the online voter information inquiry system, registered electors can verify their registration status and check their particulars. And the details of the publicity activities are set out in paragraphs 10 to 14 of the paper. There are three major categories. We make use of mass media and we publish leaflets. That's one way of publicity, including APIs on TVs, radios, radio programs, the placement of advertisements in major MTR stations and other public transport operators, the hanging of posters. The extensive and multivarious publicity strategies will help hammer home this message to the members of the public. We also use social media frequented by Hong Kongers and mobile devices. We place electronic advertisements to enhance publicity. Third, we also take specific measures to reach out to the eligible groups to remind them to be registered as electors. We also help voters who have just moved to update their particulars. For example, at the registration of persons, officers of the Immigration Department, registration counters will be set up to encourage members of the public who are there to collect the ID cards to be registered, especially those who have just reached the age of 18 or those who just attained permanent residency. Second, for higher education institutions, government buildings, and places frequented by crowds, counters will be set up to help them register as electors. We also write to newly completed private and public housing estates to remind households to report the change in address and to appeal to those who have yet to register early. That concludes my presentation. I welcome questions from members.
好，唔該。
Thank you very much. Floor is now open for members to ask questions because of the time constraint, but we do not have too many members present, so may I propose 4 minutes per member, questions and answers included. Thank you. Chairman, I understand the importance of becoming an elector. I come from a public housing background. I understand that the departments concerned are adopting a reverse logic. I think being a voter is an obligation. Why do you have to ask people to spend so much public funds to ask people to register as voters? Instead, shouldn't it be the case that someone who has already applied for the ID card should automatically become an elector? So, and that anyone who doesn't want to become an elector should apply for that. So for voters registration, you're wasting time and money and human resources. Those of us who work in the community, we have to go out to help the members of the public to register as voters. and they will ask all kinds of questions. For example, if they don't have any proof of residence and so on, I mean, what evidence can they, rely upon as proof of evidence? So why is it that if the member of the public, is not, why is it we have such a low registration rate? It's because you have too many hurdles stopping people from participating. Many elderly people living in public housing estates don't understand at all. You send them a letter asking them to provide evidence of their residence, and they don't know how to deal with it, so they just ignore the letter. And at the time of the election, they realized that, they have been disqualified as electors. So I hope the department can answer all my questions in the remaining 2 minutes. Let me answer the question at the policy level. I think we've heard people in the community asking why do we have this voter registration system. I think we've been working on this for so many years. We always insist that being an elector is a choice, a voluntary choice. That is wrong, I'm telling you. Why don't you review that? Now, if we were to change our policy to make it mandatory for people to register as voters, that would be a major policy change, and we need to consider that very carefully. Also, Mr. Lee suggested that someone who turns 18 will automatically become a voter. Now, according to our law, the requirement is that such a person will need to have resided in Hong Kong at least 3 years. So there has to be a way for that person to prove that he has resided in Hong Kong for 3 years. The REO has no way, if that person doesn't provide the evidence, to prove that he has already lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. There's no way for us to find out whether or not he has actually been ordinarily residing in Hong Kong for 3 years. Well, I think that's exactly what I'm saying. You're not making use of big data. Have you actually worked with the immigration department? People go to the immigration department to apply for the ID. So what's the use of the ID card in that case? You say you can obtain the information from the immigration department. You can't explain why you cannot find evidence to prove that they've lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. I think you've misunderstood the point here. The immigration department has, information as to whether or not the person is a permanent resident and so on. But doesn't mean that that person has ordinarily been residing in Hong Kong for the last 3 years. Even the immigration department that would not know that. There's no way for us to exchange data with them to obtain such information. Next, to answer your other question regarding random, checks. In the past, there have been instances of vote rigging, so we have to have random checks so that when we come across suspicious cases, we have to ask the person whether he still lives in the same residence, because we have reasons to suspect that you are not. So we would then ask them to provide us with evidence so that we can actually put the name back onto the voters' registration. So for these operational details, I'll ask Mr. Wong to explain why it is necessary to have this random check system. Thank you. Mr. Lee asked a question regarding proof of residence. I think the REO would accept that the documents we issued in March to prove that the voter is still living in the same residence. And evidence would include, for example, invoices issued by public utility companies or documents issued by judicial organizations or statements of banks or MPFA and so on. We also have invoices of telecommunication companies and also, tenancy agreements chopped by the IRD. If the person concerned cannot provide such proof of residence, he or she can still have other ways to provide the necessary information to us. If they don't have such evidence, the person who cohabit with him, who has the proof of residence, that elector can provide a statement from his cohabitor, so long as he provide the name of the person he lives with, and that person furnishes the proof of residence, and the document is properly certified, we would accept the statement from that cohabitor. If failing that, he can still make a statutory declaration at the district offices in our 18 districts, so it's free of charge. He can make a statutory declaration to vow that he lives at a particular residence, and we would accept that. Most importantly, we would confirm the authenticity of the particulars in the voters' register. So that's the principle. So unless the person really is very keen to take part in the election or to cast the votes, otherwise he or she wouldn't do what you suggested. Now, we need to provide proof of residence, but you still cannot ascertain whether I've lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. Indeed, the proof of residence will prove where you live. But at the same time, you have to state yourself that you have lived in that, or you have been ordinarily residing in that residence for 3 years, or in Hong Kong. Not necessarily the same residence. If you make a false statement, that would be a criminal offense. Yes, I understand. I think you should still consider making use of big data. One point you need to consider is whether you should actually make it compulsory or should voter registration be voluntary. Mr. Tang, or Professor Chen, I agree that we should encourage the members of the public to register as voters. I think appealing to the members of the public to register as voters, you will need to do it in a comprehensive manner, and you need to adopt a targeted approach, especially for the government will need to understand the reason why some people don't register as voters, and really, tackle the root of the problem. Only by doing so can we raise the registration rate. But I understand that every year the government adopts the same publicity, approach. You will set up counters at the immigration department and send out, registration forms and publicity in secondary schools and tertiary institutions. So I like to ask every year for different age groups, what is the registration rate of different age groups and people from different sectors? Do you have any new measures to encourage or insist people to register as voters? Secondly, even though we have already proven that after the electoral system has been perfected and we now have balanced participation and we have widespread representation, and we have now built up a peaceful legislative council, but foreign forces are always smearing and attacking our electoral system, so that even now some members of the public still have misunderstanding about our electoral system and even refuse to register as voters and give up the right. So my question is that when you promote voter registration, can you step up your promotion so that after we've perfected our electoral system, we should make the public understand that this is progress of our democratic electoral system, and also to volunteer to register as voters and to actively participate in our various elections. I think the government should do that. Mr. Wong. Well, thank you for the question. We fully understand Mr. Chen's point that voter registration, we need to adopt a targeted approach. I think right now the voter registration rate is already 91%, and we believe that that is a very satisfactory level. Mr. Chen asked about the registration rate for the different age groups. I think the rate is very high for different age groups. The registration, normally we are done mainly at the immigration department, and we also adopt very targeted approach in respect of the tertiary institutions and so on. Our biggest clientele are the people who are just about to turn 18 to 21, people who have just reached adulthood and are eligible to vote, or people who have just become qualify as permanent resident, that is, they have lived in Hong Kong for 7 years and can apply the permanent resident ID card. So these are the people who would appear at the office of the immigration department when they apply for ID, or for secondary school students and tertiary students. So that is why we are setting up, counters at these premises and ask our assistants to help these young people to register as voters. This is exactly how we adopt a targeted approach. As for the perfecting of the electoral system going forward, we will be promoting to the public how the perfected electoral system can help us further, enhance our democratic system, and there will be more promotion and publicity to be launched shortly. Regarding 95% voter registration, so you're 92.5%. That is the 92.5% of all the eligible citizens in Hong Kong. Yes. Paragraph 9b said that for the omission list, now, although the LegCo will write a letter to the member public, ask them to provide evidence of their residence to prove that they're ineligible. If they fail to respond, then his name will be removed from the voters register, and he will not be able to vote. That is tantamount to disqualification. I also ask whether there is any constitutional basis for you to do that. According to Article 26 of the Basic Law, all permanent residents in Hong Kong enjoy the right to vote and to be voted. Now, if just because you receive a letter, which is not a registered letter, registered mail, and the letter requests for his proof of residence, and he failed to do that, and because of that he loses his right to vote. So, according to the laws in the mainland, if someone is being deprived of his political rights, including his right to vote, only if you have broken the law or you are sentenced to death would you be punished for that. In Hong Kong, it could be so easy in the next round of election to be disqualified as a voter. Is there a solid basis in the law for you to do that? Or should you confirm with the use of big data to prove that the person is a permanent resident in Hong Kong, rather than simply sending out a letter, which is not even a registered mail, to do that? I will ask Mr. Wong to explain the procedure, which is quite not as simple. It's not that simple as Mr. Tang suggested, that we can so easily disqualify a voter. And in the basic law, we said the person who, in accordance with the law, enjoys the right to cast votes. The electoral law already required that person to provide proof of residence, and there is certainly a legal basis for what we do. On the subject of big data, one question is that we cannot arbitrarily make use of big data. According to the privacy ordinance, all data provided to any data user, that would need to be a purpose. If providing the purpose is not, the data is not for the purpose of the election, then the user of such data cannot divulge such data to the LegCo for the purpose of conducting the election. Perhaps I will now ask Mr. Wong to explain in further details how the COP works.
Mr. Tang asked for the legal basis. We will act in accordance with Section 7 of Cap 541, that is, in compiling the provisional registers, the LegCo can start an inquiry process. In other words, the registered address on the provisional registers will be cross-checked with the address of the elector, and inquiry letters will be sent to the elector for verification. If particulars are not received before the statutory deadline from the registered elector concerned, the REO will need to put the name of the register in the omission list for further inspection. If the person concerned does not lodge a claim or provide information before the statutory deadline, then the REO cannot include the particulars of that registered elector on the final register. In other words, the registered elector will not be able to vote. Now, Mr. Tang asked about the legal basis. It has far-reaching implications. It affects the elector's right to vote. And that is why on the letter, we first of all affix a chop in red and to remind the elector concerned that he must open this letter because the voting right may be affected. And after publishing the omissions list, another letter will be sent to remind the person concerned to check the letter and to verify the registration particulars and to confirm the residential addresses. After sending the inquiry letter, we also follow up on the correspondence address, including the email, mobile phone number provided by the elector, to reach out to the elector and remind him to contact us. Hong Kong permanent resident. I understand from the Basic Law that rights are enshrined in the Basic Law to allow him to vote and be voted. His permanent residency is the basis, not where the elector lives, because this is administrative. Is it so influential as to affect the person's right to vote and be voted as enshrined in the Constitution? Mr. Lai Tung Kwok. Members just now exchanged views with the administration on the registration process. I think this all stems from the ordinarily residing in Hong Kong requirement. According to Article 26 of the Basic Law, Hong Kong residents have the right to vote and be voted in accordance with the law. And by the law, we mean the electoral law, and in it we have the ordinary residence requirement. According to various judgments handed down by the courts, when we talk about acting in accordance with the law, we need to clearly spell out which law we're referring to. I think the crux of the matter is the definition of ordinarily residing in Hong Kong and the general understanding of this phrase by members of the public. As Hong Kong government now encourages members of the public to live in the Greater Bay Area, many in our population, especially the elderly, will follow suit. Now, when they live in the Greater Bay Area, will you allow them to change the residential address for the registration to be valid? And will the voting right be revoked if they report that they live in the Greater Bay Area? Because otherwise, you will be going against what is stated in Article 26 of the Basic Law, and their constitutional rights will be violated. How does the government explain clearly to members of the public? Of course, if you only have a utility bill, you won't be able to prove ordinary residence in Hong Kong because the definition of this phrase is quite arbitrary. It is to be decided on a case-by-case basis. So I'd like to have the government's view on how they enforce the ordinarily residing in Hong Kong requirement. I want to explain that this legal concept of ordinarily residing in Hong Kong is not unique to electoral laws. About paragraph 4 of Article 24 of the Basic Law, it clearly spells out the ordinary residence requirement and that one must live in Hong Kong for 7 years. So this is a very clear concept spelled out in the Basic Law. It is not one drawn up by the electoral office. And according to court judgments, if one legally resides in Hong Kong for the purpose of domiciling in Hong Kong for work, for study, right, Chair, I know that. What about foreign domestic helpers? Do they ordinarily reside in Hong Kong? No, that's according to a court judgment. But what are the justifications? In a court case, the court carefully examines the grounds provided by both parties and the conditions of stay for foreign domestic helpers in Hong Kong. In the court of first instance, in fact, the government lost the case. So I think in different case scenarios, there are different definitions for ordinarily residing in Hong Kong, and it is not, there is no standard definition. Yes, I'll give you time. I agree that it's not a case of 1 + 1 = 2. We need to have regard to the circumstances of the case. But in some cases, there may be gray area. A gray area. I don't think this is the original intent of the law to say that it should be addressed each and every time. And in other words, Chair, what about Hong Kong elderly people living in the Greater Bay Area? Do they ordinarily reside in Hong Kong? Do they have any voting right in Hong Kong? What if an elderly lives in the Greater Bay Area after retirement and comes back to vote? Are you going to report this elector? I think this is an issue arising from new developments. Perhaps the REO should go back and give it a thought, especially when the Hong Kong SAR government encourages integration with the Greater Bay Area. And we also have the Guangdong scheme and Fujian scheme, which may affect the voting rights of those eligible under these schemes. So do consider the new developments and the new policies and how voters' rights are affected. Right, just to supplement, I'm sorry, in the interest of time, please. If we change this definition of ordinarily residing in Hong Kong, this will be a major departure for, in terms of policy stance. It affects whether, well, say for somebody permanently leaving Hong Kong, he still has a status as a Hong Kong permanent resident, and there is a big question mark on whether this person should be allowed to continue to participate in public affairs. Ms. Nixie Lam. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to turn to another topic now. I think all in all, members wish to make it more convenient for electors to vote. In the past, the district offices or government buildings, there may be booths set up to help people register. We just want to see if there are more expeditious means for people to be registered as electors. And that means more booths to be set up at different locations to give to enhance efficiency. Another point, and this is a legal issue, whether everyone is mandated to be registered, such as in Australia. If you don't vote, you need to pay a fine, and that's a different legal basis we're talking about. It's really difficult to have any conclusion at this panel. Second, accuracy is very important. You may recall a few years back, I was in the news because my address was changed in the register. Somebody changed my particulars. Well, we have no privacy to speak of as political figures, so I once put in my address and then somebody faked my signature and changed that address in the register. It's about how we verify the identity of the person asking for a change of particulars. I went through the procedures in order to retrieve the form. I paid a small sum to find out if indeed I was the one who appended the signature on the form. So accuracy is also very important. The other point is, as mentioned by the REO, it is not possible to exchange data freely with other government departments because of privacy laws. And I think that the turnover rate or the turnout rate is also of importance. Say, there may be different ways to interpret this rate. Mr. Chek.
Well, I'll be brief. We agree that that the more voters register, the better. The registration rate now is already quite satisfactory. It's 91%. We will continue to step up our effort to do better. The REO understands that we need to be vigorous. We've already stepped up our effort to verify the identity of the persons who register as voters. The law has also been amended to afford greater protection to the voters register so that the data pertaining to the voters will be protected. Anything further to add? Chairman. In the current voter registration campaign, we encourage the voters to use the inquiry system online to check whether or not his personal data is accurate. Dr. Priscilla Leung, thank you. I think whether the person can prove that he has that right and the right itself are two separate issues. I understand that some members of the public have not responded to the questions you put to them. As a result, they have been disqualified as voters. But after they have provided the evidence, the name could be put back onto the register. But for that particular term, he will not be able to vote. But anyway, I'd like to further add that each and every time we discuss this subject at this panel, I like to stress that many senior citizens, for innocent reasons, I think you send them a letter in small prints and they can easily overlook that and not reply. As a result, they will lose their right to vote for that particular term. Technically, sometimes they will go to a voting center. For example, people who live in Hon YIM has to go to a Hon YIM to cast their votes, and they don't understand. I mean, sometimes technology can actually mess up the addresses of the polling stations, especially in 2015 and 2019 when there was very fierce competition. This problem arose in many districts. And secondly, the letter you send to the voters and your follow-up work, I'm not very satisfied with that, because you cannot mechanically assume that people who live in tenement buildings and the senior citizens will understand that letter. I've shown you that letter each and every time. One can easily, not respond. And even people who are residing in Hong Kong, they only realize that they've lost the voting right at the polling station because they've not replied to your letter. Even after you've sent out that letter and you're disqualified that person, is it because the person has passed away or has he moved? So I think by making use of big data, shouldn't you follow up on that further? I think the members, assistants are helping these people, but there's not that much they can do. I think these policy secretaries during the last 3 terms have discussed the same issue, especially in the Greater Bay Area. We are now encouraging people to live there. When people live there want to come back to cast their votes, they're dwelling. It's a very controversial term. Is it that they only have a place of dwelling in Hong Kong, or if they come back to Hong Kong and live with a relative, if there is a connection between the two, and you would still allow that if they have the sincerity to come back in person to vote? I do not extend this to cover people who don't live in China but overseas. Let's say people who have emigrated to other jurisdictions and still come back to Hong Kong. They can even cast votes overseas. I think you have to allow me to finish. I have to insist. I think the mainland, I think, and Hong Kong are one and the same country. I think for people who live overseas can come back to Hong Kong to cast a vote. I think they have to come back in person to cast the votes. Whereas if they live in the mainland, then you have to consider. Well, I tend to be more conservative. Some people ask whether or not you can set up a counter for them to vote in the mainland. But I think the safest approach is to require them to come back to Hong Kong to cast the votes, so that the election that we hold in Hong Kong, I think we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are involved. Making such an arrangement in the mainland for them to vote may not be very convenient. I reiterate that if these people don't live in the mainland, people are talking about electronic voting and so on. I don't think we should allow those living overseas to vote. But even those who are living in the mainland should come back to return in person to vote. Or at least they can cast the votes at the border between Hong Kong and the mainland. I think they would need to take the vote that they cast seriously. Well, this is my personal opinion. I don't think you would be able to answer the question. I don't want to argue with you, but you have to really address the anomaly in the enforcement that you take. Right. Ms. Carmen Kang, thank you. If we share the same objective, that is, in the voter registration campaign, we want more voters to participate in our election. Now, the voter registration number for 2022 was 4.41 million. And you have 1.8 million people using the I Am Smart apps. So we've been discussing how we can promote the I Am Smart apps. Has the government any intention to make use of the I Am Smart app? Can we use that to help member public to register as voters, or to check our particulars and so on? Thank you. I think the REO all along has been working with the government Information Controller Office to see how we can make use of that app to promote voters registration. I think this year we should be able to make it in time to use the I Am Smart apps during the voter registration campaign this year, that we will, as a pilot scheme, ask our voter registration assistants to help member public to register by making use of this function to help them apply to be registered as voters. We would make use of this pilot to get experience to see how we can further enhance our system and procedure. It is our target that in the next voter registration campaign, we will actively promote the use of the I Am Smart apps to help us with the voter registration. We have members who want to ask for a second round. Because of time constraint, 1 minute each. I'd like to add that for those living in the GBA, I think if they want to respond to our appeal and they're now living in the mainland, whether to start up a business or to retire or work, I think we should be lenient in respect of these people. If they have close relatives in Hong Kong, I think we can allow to come back to Hong Kong and live with those relatives, so we don't need to disqualify them. But at the time they cast a vote, they still need to come back in person to vote. So because if they live in a mainland or retired, then I think we should accommodate these people. Lee Chen Kang, 1 minute. I'm very disappointed with the answer from the Bureau. I'd like to insist that they are ignoring the point that we're making. We hope that more voters can successfully be able to cast their votes. Dr. Priscilla Leung asked the question just now. That is, but at the time nearing the election, only then do they realize that they have been disqualified. Can they, come back with proof of evidence and tell you that to ask that they will be allowed to vote? I think if you make use of technology, you can certainly do that. The answer is whether or not you're willing to do so. On the question of residents in Hong Kong, the government, I think the COVID, the government was able to set up, a voting booth at the border. So wasn't that catering to the needs of Hong Kong people living in the mainland? Is it that if you cannot do that, wouldn't that deter people who would like to cast their votes? A brief answer. For voting at the border, normally these are the people who ordinarily live in Hong Kong. They are in the GBA only because they have been sent by the companies in Hong Kong to work there, or Hong Kong residents studying at the mainland. Of course, they can then come back to Hong Kong or cast their votes at the border. It is totally compatible with the requirement of residing in Hong Kong ordinarily for 3 years. Right. If I may sum up, members today would like you to pay more attention to follow-up work after someone has been disqualified, making use of big data, and thirdly, how can we cope with the issues with more exchanges with the mainland. With that, I think we can end our discussion on this item today. Item 5 is AOB. We do not have any other business today, so with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
唔該晒。